Matthew. What you've done is fine. Just another thing, just so I can give you 5 cents for today, is you could use a paint effect. You can go into your rendering menu, and under paint effects you've got get brush, and you've got flowers mesh. I wouldn't use the flowers because they don't give very nice deformable objects, but the flower mesh would. Choose something which is roughly what you're after, and then draw in a flower. Now you'll see that that flower is fairly small, and we can adjust that in a second, but first thing you want to do is to get 12 also flowers. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We've got 12 flowers. Next thing we want to do, so that we can save a bit of time, is to select all of the brush strokes at the same time. Under paint effects you've got share one brush. The thing about that is that now when I've got one brush, I'll be changing the properties from all the brushes in one go. So there we go, a quick number of brushes, number of strokes, and you've also got in each one of these individual ones, you've got the seed, so you can randomize them. Some of them might be slightly bent over. I think that you had a few that were bent over, so you can go through and go through the seed for each one and get some nice bendy looking flowers like that. There's a couple of bendy ones like that. See if we can do a few at a time. Probably won't allow me to do it, but you get the idea. You can also just bend them yourself, but just a bit easier to find one that's already pre-bent, and it also changes the shape of the flower. So regardless of how you do it, you can then just select them all and go modify, convert paint effects to polygons, and this will give you that, and you can delete history. I'm going Alt-Shift-D. It should delete history, I think. It did, I just don't have them. It's there. So these are all done, and the best part is that they're already textured as well, and I don't think they're going to be sharing exactly the same shader. So if you wanted to quickly modify all of them, you'd have to open up your Hypershade. So I've got my keyboard under the screen here. Oh, they do, okay, they're showing the same brush, so that's good. So if you want to make them white flowers like you had in your video reference, you just need to go through and make a few modifications here. This colour that they use here is based upon a file texture, so you need to make sure that you've got your here you'll see that that's attached to a colour, but that one there is also attached to a colour. Interesting. Let's just graph this and see what it's got. Okay, the ramp, but it's in the colour balance, that's where it comes in. So that particular colour is in the colour gain. So if you want to change that to a white flower, go into Photoshop and change that. That's probably the easiest way of going, because I don't think there's any other way of doing that when it's such a strong colour as purple. Or you could just be happy with purple, give her purple flowers. So once you've got all them, it's just a question of arranging them, bit of flower arrangement, organising them into a group. Just pause this while I do that because it's utterly boring. And what I would do with that after they've been put together in a group is I would combine them together, because it's going to save you a lot of time trying to manipulate this. So I grab all of the meshes, all the polygons, and go into your mesh menu, mesh, combine, and then delete history on all of them. So to make sure I've got the right thing, delete all history, and that's just leftover rubbish. So that's one flower. And with the flower, there's one or two things you could do with this one. As you said before, you could use a bend deformer, and that's fine. Just to show you something different, just so you get a bit of an interesting insight into the world of rigging, we go into animation under your joint tool. Where are we? Skeleton, joint tool, and I'm holding down X so I snap to the grid so we get joint orientation happening properly. So I'll just quickly put a joint system through there, and that's going to allow this sort of movement backwards and forwards. So you've got more of a custom floppiness to it, and then quite simply all you need to do is select that, select the other thing, and go skin, bind skin, smooth bind, and select the joints, use the default, reset it. That's fine. There's only 4 joints on here, so it's not going to use the 5 influences, so it doesn't really matter. Bind skin. And with that, as long as you select all the joints, you should be able to get that. Now you can see down here, and that's largely to do with the pane effects, although they don't seem to be that bad. The more joints you got, the floppier it's going to look. So we could just delete history on that one and just draw another one. If you want something to be really floppy, I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. Now the difference between this and using a bend deformer is that the bend deformer is only going to give you a bend or a bend, whereas this one you can get some S movements or stuff like that. So here I'll scale them down so that they come down to the size of the bunch. I'm scaling in X. Doesn't matter about scaling joints. And then again we go back and bind it, and it should be something a little bit more floppy. And as I said before, the advantage in that one is that you can get specific movements. Not that you'd really want that, but. And the main thing I was saying as well in my email about inheriting transforms is that when you rig something like that, you want to have a controller at the bottom of it. So say a circle, and that would be the thing that you parent into your hand, so maybe have it at the level of where the hand's going to connect there. And I generally like to have something like that, where you go flower, con. I would use my naming, I use Comet Rename, and give these all good names. So I'd write flower underscore, and that renames them, and then suffix would be say joint. So they're all got a name, and of course we've got the flower mesh. So that's all nicely named, and try to keep everything consistent. Flower joint, and that should be, just because I'm being retentive. So all three of them are together, and they should be in one group, and that group should be your flower prop. Okay, now when you're parenting your stuff to your character, you parent your constraint to that guy there. Now this guy here is going to have a control on it, and I'll freeze its transformations, make sure all the transformations are frozen. Okay, and the idea behind this is that we're going to be able to move the base thing around with that. So when we move our joint around, it moves the plant. When we move this around, it should move the joint around. So first thing I'm going to do is set up a parent constraint between the base joint and the controller. So constrain parent with offset. That way we get the flower moving around with it wherever we want it to go. And then we can make some custom controls. So say for example here, I'm going to go in and add an attribute and have the first one called bend from say -1 to 1, the default of 0. And then we'll try just doing that basic bend. So I'm going to grab all the joints that, and under animation we've got set driven keys. We'll got all those ones set as driven, and this is the driver. So we use bend here to control all the rotations here. Now it just depends what you want to have here, because this could be bend in one direction, so it's bending in Z at the moment. So I'll rename that to bend Z in a second, but we want rotate Z to bend, and at the moment it's at 0, so we'll key that in at 0, type in 1, and then select these guys and rotate it to one direction, say like that. It's a full bend in one direction, and then key that in, get the opposite direction, say -1, and select those joints again, flop it over into the opposite direction, and key that in. So now you've got a bend control which allows you to flop that backwards and forwards. Now if you wanted to make it feel like it's completely stuck in his hand, I would go through that first joint here, these ones here, not that one. Actually that's interesting, I should not have had that one in the set driven key. Let me just pull that one out. Okay, so there's the pair blend, we don't want that, we don't want anything inside there. So that keeps that straight. At the moment it was getting a set driven key. So So that's better now. It keeps the bottom straight so that wherever he's holding it stays fixed to his hand, and the orientation of the bottom one is entirely based upon the orientation of the hand control. So that should get you out of the woods with that one. And like I said, if you wanted to get something like an S shape, so we could also do that here. We could add another one. Go channels, attributes, add attributes, say bend, S bend. Okay, and say for example you wanted to flick it, you would again, actually no, let's just keep it simple. Well, I won't call that one S bend, I'll call that one bend in the opposite direction. So let's edit my attribute, call this one Z bend, and this one, what's the other direction we've got? We've got Z and we've got Y, okay. So Y, attributes, edit, so instead of S bend, it's Y bend. So we'll load that up again into the driver. So we've got our Y bend here, and now instead of working on Z, we're going to rotate Y. So we'll key it in its upright position, and then look at that, it's not in Y after all, it's in, that's X, and that's Y. Okay, so that's cool, Y. Alright, so we've got rotate Y and Y bend, key it upright, have a full Y bend in one direction, and select all the joints, bend it in one direction, key it in, go in the opposite direction, and then bend it in the opposite direction, and key it in. So now you've got a controller. Again, I've done it again. I'll put the first joint in there. Alright, so that's good now. So that's something you can pick up, move around. You can't scale it as such, because when you scale that, it's going to stuff everything up inside here. If you wanted to scale that, we would have to do a scale constraint as well between this guy and this guy, and its pivot would also have to be, actually the pivot is there, the pivot of this guy is not there, so we'd have to move its pivot down to the base, which could kind of cause problems. We'll do a scale constraint with an offset. I'm not sure if that's going to work. I should have thought of this before I started, but constraint, scale, maintain offset. Yeah, it's not going to work. Okay, it's going to have to be, when I scale this up, I only have to scale all of them. So you'll see that I'll have to scale all of them at the same time. So I'll do a scale constraint between this one, and this one. Constraint scale, and I'll just press G. Oops. G. Let's just see how far we're going to do that. Yeah, a few of them didn't get done. Anyway, I think that should do. I've got scale 2, 3, 4, 5. Need that one and that one. And that one. Okay, there's going to be some problems there, and that's largely because I didn't think about that at the beginning with the pivot, but it's a flower and you can use it, and the good thing about that one, as I said before, is that you can, okay, it's something I haven't thought about as well. With these controls, another thing it's also a good idea to do is to set limits. At the moment, there is no limit on that one, so I should have a minimum maximum. That way it doesn't go above or below what you want it to do. Here I'd set that one on the previous one, so that's all cool. Last thing you want to do, hide your joints, and you're done. Alright, hope that helps. A little foray into the world of rigging for you. Have a good day, bye.